Have you ever seen anything like this before? For most people, the honest answer is probably no. At first glance, it looks strange, almost like an object pulled straight from a treasure hunt movie. But this is not fiction. It is real. The Ethiopian Bible stands as one of the most mysterious and controversial religious texts in existence. Even Ethiopia itself is wrapped in layers of history and unresolved mysteries that often defy simple explanation. But that broader story is for another time. Ethiopia is home to one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. It is also unique in Africa as a nation that was never formally colonized. Because of this uninterrupted history, Ethiopians are able to trace their lineage far back into antiquity, traditionally to Ham, one of the sons of Noah. This ancestral claim is not held only within Ethiopia. It has also been acknowledged and discussed within Jewish historical traditions. However, this discussion is not about the nation's ancestry. It is about what Ethiopia has preserved. Ethiopia possesses some of the oldest biblical manuscripts known to exist, many of them predating even the famous King James Version. While the King James Bible contains 66 books, the Ethiopic Bible includes 88. These additional texts encompass writings from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and other scrolls that are entirely absent from most Western Christian traditions. Some of these writings were unknown or unseen elsewhere for centuries. What makes this especially striking is that these scriptures were in Ethiopian possession long before Christianity formally arrived in the country during the 4th century. In other words, Christianity was not introduced to Ethiopia as a foreign belief system in the way it was to many nations. Christian belief was already deeply rooted there by the time it spread widely across the Roman world. Historical records reinforce this claim. The Egyptian traveler, monk, and historian Cosmas Indicopleustes wrote in the mid-6th century that Ethiopia was already a Christian nation when he visited. He documented how Ethiopian rulers opened their borders to Christian refugees fleeing persecution from hostile kingdoms and empires. Some Ethiopian tribes are believed to have worshipped the Christian God for more than 3,500 years. As a result, the oldest continuously organized Christian body in the world may not be the Roman Catholic Church, as is often assumed, but the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, known locally as Tewahedo. Ethiopia is also home to one of the earliest illustrated Christian books ever discovered. This manuscript, part of the Gospels, was written in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian language. It was uncovered in 2010 in a remote monastery perched high atop a mountain in Ethiopia, further underscoring how much of this history has remained hidden for centuries. According to the Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's sacred historical text, an extraordinary event took place in the 10th century BC. The Ethiopian ruler, commonly known as the Queen of Sheba, traveled to Jerusalem to seek the wisdom of King Solomon. This journey is referenced in the widely accepted biblical canon. What the Bible does not record, however, is what Ethiopian tradition claims followed. The Queen of Sheba and King Solomon had a son named Menelik. She returned with him to Ethiopia, where he would eventually become the nation's first emperor. Modern research has added an intriguing dimension to this account. In 2012, genetic studies examining the DNA of various Ethiopian populations revealed markers suggesting ancient mixing with Egyptian, Israeli, or Syrian peoples around 3,000 years ago, the same period traditionally associated with the reign of the Queen of Sheba. While not definitive proof, these findings align remarkably well with the historical narrative preserved in Ethiopian tradition. Despite this deep historical foundation, the Ethiopian Bible remains excluded from the biblical canon recognized by most Christian denominations today. Even more striking is that many believers, sometimes even those within the same faith tradition, have never heard of it at all. This raises an uncomfortable question. How did such an ancient and well-preserved body of scripture become so thoroughly marginalized? To understand why the Ethiopian Bible was rejected, it helps to revisit the history of the Bible itself. The Bible as we know it today did not always exist in its current form. In the early centuries, numerous texts circulated among Jewish and Christian communities. These writings differed widely in content, interpretation, and authority. Originally, biblical texts were written in Hebrew before being translated into other languages. One of the most significant early translations was carried out by Saint Jerome, who translated the scriptures into Latin around the year 400. His work became known as the Vulgate and remained the principal Latin version of the Bible for centuries. The Vulgate contained 39 books of the Old Testament, then referred to as the Hebrew Bible, and 27 books of the New Testament. However, during the first century, many additional writings about Jesus' life and teachings also emerged. Some were sincere attempts to preserve memory, others were imaginative or misleading accounts that resembled what we might today call fan fiction. Without a centralized authority or the ability to verify sources, many people accepted these writings as authentic. As is often the case, false stories spread faster than accurate ones, creating confusion and division within early Christian communities. This situation alarmed church leaders. To address the growing chaos, they convened major councils, including the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD and the First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD. Their goal was to determine which texts would be recognized as legitimate scripture. The criteria were strict. A text needed to be written by a direct follower of Jesus or by someone who had witnessed his teachings, originate in the first century, and align coherently with the rest of accepted scripture. Over time, this process shaped what became the New Testament. Centuries later, another pivotal transformation occurred during the reign of King James I of England. Although the Vulgate had existed for over 500 years, numerous Bible versions and translations were still circulating by the early 1600s. The lack of uniformity troubled the king, who feared that competing interpretations could destabilize both religious unity and royal authority. Several clergy members also petitioned him, arguing that existing translations contained errors. In response, King James had assembled a team of 47 scholars to examine all known biblical translations. Divided into 6 groups, they worked independently for 7 years under strict rules designed to prevent bias. They relied on original Hebrew and Greek texts, cross-checking sources to ensure accuracy. When the scholars' findings were compared, their conclusions showed remarkable consistency despite their separation. The work was approved and credit was given to divine guidance. In 1611, the King James Bible was published. Thanks to advances in printing technology, it became more widely available than any previous version. However, both the King James translation and earlier decisions made during the formation of the Vulgate resulted in the exclusion of certain books. These texts disappeared from most Western Bibles, but they were never removed from the Ethiopian Bible, which retained its complete collection of scripture. With this historical background in mind, the central question becomes clearer. Why was the Ethiopian Bible ultimately rejected by mainstream Christian tradition? The answer is complex, shaped by theology, politics, geography, and power. And there are many reasons behind it. The Ethiopian Bible is not accepted by most Christian traditions for several reasons, but the primary one lies in its inclusion of additional books known as pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha are texts that are falsely attributed to famous figures of the past or whose claimed authors are not their true authors. In many ways, they function like ancient fan fiction. Works written later, but presented as if they originated from revered biblical figures. Because of this, most Christian traditions consider pseudepigraphal writings non-canonical. The books that were removed or rejected during the formation of the biblical canon were texts that early scribes and theologians already believed were not divinely inspired. Many of these writings were produced both before and after the time of Jesus, sometimes with questionable motives. From the perspective of church leaders, allowing such texts to circulate freely posed a long-term risk. To illustrate the logic behind this concern, imagine someone today publishing a book claiming that Kobe Bryant was not a great athlete. Such a book would be immediately rejected, and the author would face intense criticism because the claim is clearly false. However, if that same book survived for 500 years, future readers, lacking first-hand knowledge, might begin to question the truth. To prevent false narratives from gaining legitimacy over time, church authorities believed it was necessary to eliminate them early. Interestingly, even the Ethiopian Bible itself contains 2 distinct canons, the broader canon and the narrow canon. Before explaining the difference, it is important to define what a canon actually is. A canon is a generally accepted rule, standard, or set of criteria used to judge authenticity or authority. For example, it is canon for a phone to have a screen, for a country to have a president, or for a YouTube channel to aim for more subscribers. In religious terms, a canon determines which texts are considered authoritative scripture. The broader and more widely discussed Ethiopian canon contains 81 books. This version includes texts such as Enoch, Jubilees, the 3 books of Maccabean, the Epistle of Clement, the 4 books of Synodos, and several others. This is the version most people refer to when discussing the Ethiopian Bible and the one that has attracted the most attention and controversy. The narrow canon, by contrast, was overseen and formally endorsed by Emperor Haile Selassie. He declared this version to be the official and completed Ethiopian Bible. The precise reasons behind this decision remain sensitive and are often debated, and explaining them in detail can easily lead to heated arguments. What can be said safely is that the narrow canon contains fewer books, 72 in total, and excludes some texts found in the broader canon. While the broader canon includes everything in the narrow canon and more, it has not been reprinted since the early 20th century. This alone shows that controversy existed even within Ethiopian Christianity itself. The presence of 2 different canonical versions has undoubtedly contributed to the Ethiopian Bible's lack of acceptance elsewhere. The Ethiopian canon provides a valuable window into how the Bible has evolved over time. Contrary to popular belief, the Bible is not a single book written at one moment in history. It is a collection of texts, traditions, and lived experiences recorded over many centuries. That reality is where many of the disputes arise. Different religious communities, both those later recognized as orthodox and those deemed heretical, have long histories of including or excluding texts based on theological interpretations, cultural context, and sometimes personal or institutional priorities. Most of the biblical canon recognized today was finalized during the 4th and 5th centuries AD. By that time, Christianity in Ethiopia had already developed along a different path from Christianity in Europe and the Mediterranean world. Over the centuries, that divergence only widened. The Ethiopian Bible shares many similarities with Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Bibles, particularly in structure and theology, but it also includes additional Old Testament books. These texts were likely written in the last few centuries before Christ, late in the Old Testament period, but still before the emergence of the New Testament. Other books were added to the end of the New Testament and focus heavily on the history, organization, and identity of the Ethiopian Church itself. Another major reason for the Ethiopian Bible's rejection is linguistic. The scriptures were written in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian liturgical language. This made the text inaccessible to non-speakers for centuries. The lack of early translations, combined with Ethiopia's unique religious practices, contributed significantly to the Bible's obscurity outside the region. A third reason is far more controversial and involves politics. In the early centuries of Christianity, political power mattered deeply to the Roman Empire, often more than spiritual development. Texts that did not align with the empire's preferred theological narrative were excluded. Historical accounts even suggest that the Bishop of Rome instructed priests to destroy scrolls that were not included in the approved Bible. Some priests, however, chose instead to hide certain manuscripts. Centuries later, in the 1940s, discoveries near the Dead Sea revealed hidden texts that echoed this suppressed tradition. This helps explain why one version of the Bible appears more complete, while another reflects what human authorities deemed acceptable. In recent years, interest in the Ethiopian Bible has grown. Scholars, believers, and researchers are increasingly curious about what makes it unique and what truths it may preserve. Ethiopian churches have taken steps to make the text more accessible by translating them into additional languages and supporting academic study. On a personal level, it is remarkable that this Bible survived at all, especially considering Ethiopia's long history of conflict, including invasions by Muslim forces, occupation by Italy, and even a devastating fire in the 1930s that destroyed parts of the monastery where the Bible was kept. That it endured all of this only deepens the mystery surrounding one of the most fascinating religious texts in human history.